7 now.
Okay, Senate estimates will resume. Mr Switkowski, you've been doing some homework over the dinner break, I believe.
I have.
You have some answers for us. Please go ahead.
If I could just attempt to answer a couple of questions that were taken on notice. One from Senator Ruston pertaining to South Australia. The figures are 3,862 premises have been passed. They are roughly equally split between Aldinga and Onkaparinga.
Aldinga.
Aldinga.
Yes.
Thank you. Both are classed as South Australia regional, but they're within 50 kilometres of Adelaide, I'm told. Of the 3,862, 335 are service class 0, as we discussed, and we have 1,054 paying customers in South Australia, and these numbers will be checked again, subject to final verification. I think they're close enough.
They're quite close enough, don't do any more.
And Senator Lundy's question around the number 729,000, I'm told that post the election, the management of NBN briefed the incoming government and the minister, September 13, that the forecast, which had been revised, was for year-end 13-14, 600,000 brownfields premises passed and 129,000 greenfields, adding up to 729,000. That was consistent with the forecast of the management at that time. A lot has changed since then.
Thank you. Senator Ruston, the questions are yours.
Okay. Prior to the dinner break, there was quite a lot of discussion around the technologies and how you're going about actually physically delivering whatever the service happens to be. Wondering, in the process, I mean, what have we investigated what other countries have been doing, what mix of technologies they've been putting together, and basically basing what we're doing on that?
Right. Well, again, prior to the change in government, the strategy of NBN had been very clearly defined to be an all-fibre network with no consideration of alternatives other than for the 7% of the population that were going to be served by fixed wireless and satellite. That certainly, as Senator Ludlam implied, made us stand apart from the pack in terms of what's prevailing overseas. Overseas, by and large, there is a blend of technologies which is matched to the needs and to existing infrastructure. So what you tend to find is where there's an existing copper network, which is most places, fibre to the node is the preferred technology, and an all-fibre connection is also available, but tends to be a small proportion, a small percentage of all of the household and connections. That is typically supported by a cable network where one exists. It could be a competitive cable network, a hybrid fibre coax network, and then in larger geographies, obviously, satellite matters. A fixed wireless network is also an option. So what you see is the priorities overseas tend to be upgrading people's capacity in terms of access to the network as quickly as possible, as affordably as possible, with a blend of networks that provide you with flexibility as the technology improves and changes. And if I'm just allowed another minute to make my point, when people talk about future-proofing a network or future-proofing any technology in IT and telecoms, and I think Senator Lundy would agree, you cannot future-proof in this area. The technology moves so quickly. What we saw in 1996, we did not we've completely missed what happened 10 years later, and I'm quite confident that what we predict today will be way off the mark in 10 years' time. What you can do is with your best endeavours, configure a network that gives you optionality down the line and a cost structure that permits you to adapt, to change, to upgrade, to extend at reasonable costs. And that's why other countries have gone with a blend, a hybrid of technologies, rather than pick what they think is the solution for that year, only to discover that there may be difficulties with the solution, but also that the flexibility simply isn't there as the community needs shift around.
So I'm not verbalising, but I'll try and paraphrase that for. So basically, the model that was being previously proposed is locking us into a situation that doesn't allow us the kind of flexibility that you're proposing. So, just as an example, with the fibre to the node architecture, you know, with the with the RMs that Senator Lundy was talking about, how would something like that, from a technological perspective, be? Is there any? Could they be at risk of being stranded under this fibre to node technology?
Probably, if you can actually execute an all-fibre network everywhere in a reasonable time at a reasonable cost, then people who are currently not served will be served, and for a time, that's a very good solution. But it's a bit theoretical because as we've found with multi-dwelling units, it's proving to be very difficult to provide an all-fibre solution to large buildings or apartment buildings. So you can have a theoretical answer based upon what you feel is the best alternative, and try to impose it upon the marketplace. And in theory, that's a good outcome. But what we've found in the last 3 years in practice, there are so many issues associated with doing that, and costs being foremost amongst them, that virtually no country, I think there might be one example, has gone down that path.
Okay. Earlier on in questioning, Senator Lundy was questioning you on about whether you have studied every piece of copper infrastructure to determine whether it's usable or it's not usable. I mean, I suppose the other question could be, on the other side of that, is that did the previous government under the previous model test every piece of infrastructure that it was intending to use under its model? I mean, I suppose, but let's be fair.
It was new, so...
Everything was new? You weren't using anything at all that was from the old system? Nothing that...
Well, the ducts...
Oh, sorry, I probably shouldn't have been directed to you.
We'll just hold it. We're not getting
I'll debate
debate across the chamber. Continue your question, Senator Ruston.
Yeah. So I suppose my question is, was an audit done of any of the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure? I take my question back. Was all infrastructure to be used under the previous NBN model new?
Well, as I understand, I mean, the key bits of infrastructure, the cable, the reticulated cable itself was low risk, but the construction of it, as in the condition of the pits, the ducts, the pipes, the poles, has an analogy on the copper side, and they were obviously not perfect. And I think there was some expectation or some anticipation that as issues arose, as they have, that the obligation rested with Telstra to address it. But it's true that once you start overbuilding a network, and it is an overbuild of existing networks, both cable and copper, and you use common ducts and poles and pipes, that too comes with a whole set of problems. And we've struck a few of them in the last couple of years.
Okay. Back to the discussion around the formation of the new board and the new team that you've put together. You got a bit of criticism earlier on today. I suppose the question has to be, where else would have you found? I mean, what are the advantages of where you've got your people from? Does your board and your executive team represent what would be considered a normal and responsible mix of skills and experience to do the job?
Well, let me start with a commentary around the executive and the leadership team. In this country, Telstra has employed and continues to employ probably more than half of all of the telecom trained people. And that statement, that figure is even high if you go back 10, 20 and 30 years ago when Telstra was a monopoly. It seems to me that if you're going to overbuild or build a new generation infrastructure, that the skills that you need in that environment, and it's especially so in a fibre to the network environment, are the sort of skills that, that Telstra trains its executives in. Not just about the arcane nature of telecoms, but the nature of working with the construction industry, and also insights into how to make a network work if it depends in part on Telstra elements. So I would have thought, looking at NBN, that we would see a fair proportion of Telstra executives in the ranks. And more recently, because we've added 2 people to the senior team, there's been some commentary that there are too many people perhaps from Telstra. In reality, here are the stats in Mike Quigley's team, a total of 9 or 10 people. There was 1 person with any experience of building a fixed network in Australia and a substantial Telstra career. Just 1. That I would say was underdone. If you say, well, that's the senior team, why don't you go down a layer? If you looked at the top 100 executives, there were, I think I'm generally right, 15 who had substantial Telstra experience and 16 who had a substantial Optus and Vodafone experience. I think the balance is right, but the total number is light. And I think it shows. I think it shows in the general level of perhaps inexperience in dealing with the players in the telecom industry and in dealing with Telstra. So more recently, I've sought to ensure we've got people that understand the copper network as well as can be, and we've added a couple of Telstra executives, and I think we're getting the balance close to what it needs to be. On the board, the most recent appointments of 3 people are 3 people who are of the industry in Australia. And I can tell you from the 2 board meetings that we've had and subsequent meetings of directors, the nature of the conversation, the level of direct experience of how does a retail service provider react to this sort of a network, to these sorts of products, to these sorts of pricing algorithms. The discussions about how to deal with contractors and understand their approach to costing their bids and their requirements in terms of the margin are so much richer than could possibly have been with a board that did not have people who had come from the industry, without for a moment criticising individuals who were worthy, diligent people. But you need to have spent years, and you ideally will have spent years in most recent times, being part of the industry. Then you can be a competent board, then you can oversee management and interrogate them and challenge them, and then you have to have management that understands exactly how a physical fixed network works, and we are not there yet, but we're getting closer.
Okay.
Well, Ralph Steffens had telco experience, didn't he?
Chair.
Ralph Steffens did have telco experience, but he had no Australian experience.
Oh, okay.
And
Senator Lundy,
if I might, I want to elaborate on it because the point is a fair
I've
point.
got some questions about this that I'll come to in due
Okay.
course.
To you, Senator Urquhart.
Thank you, Chair. Some of those questions Senator Lundy did go to broadly, but of course, given that I'm a Tasmanian, then I want to concentrate specifically on some Tasmanian questions. So, how many Tasmanian premises have been passed by fibre in brownfield sites as at today, the 19th of November?
Look, Kevin, I'll put you on notice because you're our Tasmanian expert.
Yes, so we've passed 32,000 premises in brownfields in Tasmania. We've connected out of that 8,488.
8,488?
Yep.
Yep, right, thank you. The government's policy document, Economic Growth Plan for Tasmania, stated that a coalition government would honour all existing contracts that are underway. Could you define what existing contracts that are underway means to NBN Co?
Yep. There are a number of contracts that we have with people doing work in Tasmania. The first category is the brownfields work, which we just spoke to. That's the contract with Vision Stream, and we're out in the public record of being in discussions with Vision Stream commercially to to try and address the impasse that we're in at the moment relative to the numbers they've committed in their contract. So that's a commercial issue for NBN that's hopefully going to be resolved shortly. Certainly we're committed to trying to find a resolution to this in a way that they can get back on the job and work effectively but at a fair price. The second piece of work that's going on in Tasmania relates to our customer connection activities, and Vision Stream does most of that work as well, but there are a couple of subcontractors that are working directly for us in Tasmania with that. The third area is with...
Sorry, who are the other subcontractors?
There's two other subcontractors. I'll need to come back to you with the names on them.
Thanks.
They're very small players.
Yeah. Are they contracted directly to Vision Stream, or are they contracted to NBN Co?
At the moment, they're doing some pieces of work for NBN Co.
Right, okay.
But we coordinate with Vision Stream to ensure that we're
Yep.
operating the market efficiently. There are two other pieces of work when you talk about contracts and contractors. The first one is our fixed wireless rollout, which is going both on to time in Tasmania, and that's with Ericsson, who in turn have subcontracted out to, I think, John Holland, but I'll need to confirm that for you. They work, so our contract is with Ericsson then subcontract out to other players to provide that work. And the last piece is actually to do with our greenfields operations there, which is building new estates, and that is also with Vision Stream. So each of those contracts are discrete in their own nature because they deal with different types of activity for us. We've got agreements in place and we continue to work to them.
Okay. I guess, and I'm not sure whether I missed it, but I guess the key sort of point that I'm getting to there is what is the word or the existing contracts that are underway? What does that word underway mean to NBN Co? Does it mean design and consultation? Does it mean the street's been ripped up? Does it mean a contract's been issued? A work plan? What actually does that mean? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that sort of scenario about existing contracts underway?
So the contracts are agreements to do volumes of work, and within the contracts, which are reasonably complicated and complex documents, each of the tasks you described are actually specified as to what our requirements are, what their obligations are.
So they're all different in those different contracts that you talked about?
Yes. So each of the four categories of work I talked about have a different contract. And now when you come to brownfields, which is the biggest task we have with Vision Stream, within the contract with Vision Stream, each of the steps you talked about there are specified in the contract as to how we handle them.
Right.
And each of those decisions get made when you get to that piece of work.
Right, okay. I understand that on the 17th of August in the Launceston Examiner, Minister Turnbull and Senator Bushby both claimed that all existing contracts will be met, not just those that are underway. Now, as I understand it, section 10.3 of the draft corporate plan 2013 to 16 says that work packages for construction of the LNDN in Tasmania has been awarded to Vision Stream. How many premises did that contract actually cover? Or is that what you talked about with the 32,000?
It's what I talked about, but the nominal number of premises covered by that contract is 190,000 premises.
Yep.
However, within the contract, there's very specific provisions how you deal with the different tasks about design, construction, and the gates and decisions you have to make at each of those points.
So is it fair to say that the contracts are different for each of those? They're written different, or it just refers to a different meaning, or...?
There's different mechanisms within the contract as to how the decisions
yeah.
you make and what's required of NBN and then what's required of Vision Stream.
Right, okay. Now, I specifically refer to an NBN Co media release dated the 26th of March 2012, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which states Vision Stream Australia, part of the Leighton Holdings Limited group of companies, has been awarded the contract to replace old-fashioned copper telephone lines with the high-speed fibre optic broadband network in cities, towns and suburbs, covering around 200,000 homes and businesses. Will this contract be honoured?
The contract we've entered into is a volume-based contract around providing 190,000 premises. However, there are performance criteria within the contract that need to be achieved. In the absence of getting the performance achieved, then the contract will be reconsidered. Right now we're in commercial discussions with Vision Stream to try and resolve their performance.
So that 200,000 could in fact, you're saying 190, it could be less depending on the contracts and how they honour them.
Yes, and within the contracts there's always capacity to adjust the volumes within them, because we've entered into those contracts quite deliberately as a point of principle for NBN that in the event that our circumstances change, then we reserve our rights to renegotiate the basis of those contracts. So we provide commercial capacity to go, times have changed, we can restructure those contracts, and that detail is actually prescribed in the contract as to how that process works.
Oh, okay. Minister Turnbull commented on the 8th of October 2013 on ABC Radio that the contractor had basically down tools. The contractor claimed that they were constructing a FSAM in Launceston and aerial cabling across the state when those comments were made. Was there ever a period in 2013 where the NBN rollout in Tasmania was completely stopped?
The short answer is no. There was always a minimal number of staff on the ground, but if you look at our, I'll need to confirm this, I think on our website we've started to describe the rollout in Tasmania, and at one stage we were actually describing it weekly. You could see in that pattern there was a period of time where very, very few houses were turned on over the course of almost 2 months.
Right.
And so whilst Vision Stream had a residual workforce of their own on the ground, their subcontracting work had pretty much come to a stop.
Okay.
At the minimal number, they had 5 people on the ground working. That number moved between 5 and 30 at any point in time during that delay period.
Right. So in fact, as I understand it, what Minister Turnbull said on the 8th of October was that work hadn't actually ground to a halt, or basically to a halt. Work was still continuing, but it was slowed down. Is that correct? Am I understanding what you're saying?
The activity had slowed to absolutely minimal.
Right.
And when you look at the sort of numbers that have been previously on the ground...
Well, that's what I'm trying to
we're
establish,
talking about
Chair, is whether it
hundreds
was
on the job.
ground to a halt or whether it basically stopped. So, yeah, so...
Mr Brown, you say it's been reduced to an absolute minimum.
Yes.
Yeah,
So an absolute minimum is probably running on a par of ground to halt.
So our progress had stopped there for a period of almost 6 to 8 weeks. In terms of premises passed and available, it had stopped. There were a small number of people still on the ground doing work, but their progress was negligible.
Right, so it didn't stop. I'm just trying to clear that up. So the answer is no, it did not stop. Is that correct?
Maybe can I just contribute some data that I have? The 9th of September in Tasmania, 32,039 brownfields premises had been passed. On the 18th of November, so a bit over 2 months later, 32,052 premises had passed. 13 in a period of 9 weeks. That's as slow as it gets. Now, these numbers are noisy, so I don't want to be held to the difference, but it's very, very small.
Right.
That's like you have a not measurable pulse.
Yeah, okay. So if you could almost say that it sort of did down tools, then that length of time was from the 9th of September to the 18th of November. Is that...
They just happen to be the figures in front of me.
Right.
There was a further period before that when it was the same negligible progress. Right. So the number of premises that actually were declared as passed barely increased. There was a minuscule and very small number of people down on the ground actually doing work.
Okay. So in that time, from the 9th of September to the 18th of November, from 32,000 to 32,052, what would be the normal sort of numbers that you would expect had work been flowing as normal in that time?
So for Tasmania, they had achieved at the end of June...
Sorry, I'm talking about that period. So you're talking about the 9th of September to the 18th of November. So for that period of time...
Elsewhere in the country?
well, whether it be elsewhere in the country or Tasmania, the expectation would be that it would be more than 52, I expect.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So what roughly would that number have been during that period of time?
So across all of
Had
Australia,
work continued?
we would expect to see a run rate of 1,500 to 2,000
Right.
premises.
Okay. So then, given that it was that much, what was the contractor doing during that time?
They'd effectively ceased taking on new work, and were in discussions with NBN over how they resolved the fact that they did not believe that they had sufficient money in the contract to actually do the job.
Right.
And that's the commercial discussion we've been in now for 3 months.
Right, okay, so that's taken that period of time to have that discussion. How far away are you from reaching an outcome in those discussions?
We would be hopeful to conclude this in the next 2 weeks,
Right.
but you know, this is a complicated arrangement in terms of how we shift the contract we've currently got with them into one that still represents fair value for the taxpayer.
Right, okay. Does NBN Co expect contractors to engage more workers in the rollout in Tasmania until construction is completed? Now, I know Senator Lundy asked about generally in terms of that, but I'm just talking about specifically about Tasmania.
About
Tasmania. So
Yes.
does NBN Co expect that the contractors to engage more workers in the rollout in Tasmania until the construction is completed?
Yes.
And, okay, so how many, roughly?
It'll depend upon the profile of the work as to when Vision Stream get back on the job. So the 2 issues are going to be reaching agreement with Vision Stream or finding an alternative
Right.
plan, and then the profile of the work. And one of our aims now is to get a stable program that becomes predictable, and part of that is getting to a number of FSAMs that the resource base can support so that we can get some predictability into the numbers.
Okay, so I guess the question that I'm asking is, once you get through that process of the negotiation and work ramps up, to complete the rollout in Tasmania, and I hear what you're saying, but how many workers would, or how many contractors would be, how many more workers would the contractor be required to put on to complete that work?
We would estimate, depending on the period of time, it's somewhere between 300 and 400 people to work to complete the work of the brownfields build by the end of 2016.
Yeah.
But again, it definitely depends on the ramp up as to how many.
I understand that. I was just trying to sort of work out the time frame and how much. So, look, I just want to go to, obviously this has been an issue in the media. I'm sure you're aware of media reports today about the NBN and the copper network ending in Tasmania. And I understand that there's some areas where the internet and phone services are already being cut, and customers haven't yet got their connection to the NBN. Now, I mean, that's obviously a huge impost on some families, so I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Sorry, Senator Erica, are you saying that there are people without any connection?
Well, yes. Now, they have been...
Sounds like...
Sorry?
Sorry.
As I understand it, they have been offered to use mobile services, which obviously isn't very efficient for, families who are probably battling to, pay their bills now. So I guess I'm just wondering if you can comment any further on the situation there.
There are no services that are under a disconnection order from the NBN yet, so I'm not aware of the reports, but I would suggest it has nothing to do with the NBN.
Right. Can I just ask that you have a look at that?
Sure.
And
This might be something that was a function of decisions taken more than a couple of months back.
yeah, I'm just asking if you can get some information in relation to that and come back, and because obviously these people, if they are without a phone facility or an internet facility, and as I understand it, there is one particular family who run a business from home, and they're struggling to get connected to the NBN. They can't get an appointment until January. So
This sounds like a legacy of previous management.
Well, irrespective of what the legacy is, Senator Fifield, I'd actually like to find out in terms for these people in Tasmania just exactly what's happening and why they can't get an appointment with NBN before January. I mean, you know, I know it's not long till January, but it's a long time for someone who's running a business, doesn't have a phone connection or an internet connection, and is relying on a mobile service to provide that at, you know, a cost that's much broader than what they would have if they had a phone. So I'd appreciate some feedback and information you can give towards that.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's
The new management's here to help.
Senator Paris.
Sorry?
Senator Paris will be back in 1 minute.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Just before she gets back, and I'll go to you, Senator Lundy, to fill in time. Mr Brown, those figures in Tasmania, there's only roughly 25% of hooked to the NBN. Why is that? If you've gone past 32,000, only got 8,000 hooked on, are there problems hooking on, or don't people want hooked on? You've got an opt-out system there, haven't you?
It's an area where uptake rate has been less than elsewhere in the country. That's a true statement. So we have seen higher uptake rates in other locations
Like
in the
Canberra?
country.
Fantastic uptake. Highest. Is that true? Canberra has been the highest uptake rate for NBN?
Yes.
Thank you. I knew that.
One of the highest. There are a number of areas which clearly the uptake rate has been better than what was expected as we roll services out to people.
But technically Canberra's been the highest uptake.
Well, it's got the most public service.
I guess somewhere has to be.
Exactly.
It's got the highest ratio of pen pushers in
Well,
Australia.
be careful how you start to try and second guess why we are the highest uptake. The fact of the matter is, and Mr Swakowski would know this very well, was because the humble residents of Gungahlin were so deprived of broadband for so long because of Telstra's under-expenditure in their capital and network technologies.
Thank you for your
for a decade.
opinions, Senator Lundy. We now go to Senator
you
Paris.
two have a special relationship, clearly.
Senator Paris, question time for you.
Thank you. My questions relate to the NBN in the Northern Territory. Okay, can you please advise how many premises are connected to the NBN in the Northern Territory across all platforms, including fibre, fixed wireless and interim satellite services?
Kevin or Robin, you're going to have to
Yep, we've got 1,000. Sorry, let me get the numbers correctly here for you. In terms of premises passed, it's 2,760 for brownfields. It's 850 for new developments, which are the new estates, and it's 1,300 for wireless. So that's the past numbers. The activated numbers are, I'm adding this up here, sorry, including wireless combined, so wireless, satellite, brownfields and new developments is 1,270.
Back that, less than 25% again.
Correct. We've also seen in both greenfields and brownfields that one of our most extensive delays in the country, and only recently have we actually achieved the 2,700 brownfields pass numbers. So those numbers have only occurred since July.
So that's pretty fast take up in the scheme of things then.
Well, less than 25%.
Well, in the time frame, Senator.
Yeah, but still right.
Sorry, you can speak for
Still only get
yourselves.
1 in 4 hooking onto it. Sorry, Senator Paris, continue.
That's okay. Are you able to provide me with the premises and communities that are actually connected to those platforms?
The actual addresses and locations
Of the suburbs?
of the suburbs,
Yeah.
yes, we can provide that. I'll take that on notice. But
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Minister, does your government have plans to provide assistance to Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory to connect the network, given the opportunities to improve service delivery to communities and families through the NBN, particularly remote communities?
Well, I think the government's overall approach is that we want to see the NBN rolled out faster and more affordably, and that will benefit everyone in Australia. but if there are particular plans or proposals that separate to that, which would benefit particular communities, I'm happy to take that on notice. But I think the prime thing is the sooner, the faster, the better the NBN gets rolled out. That's to the benefit of all Australians.
Okay, thank you. Since the election, 10,400 territory homes just within the Darwin and Palmerston region, for which construction had commenced using NBN codes, have been removed from the rollout map. Can NBN Co guarantee these customers will receive fibre to the premises?
Senator Nova-Peris, we addressed this earlier in the afternoon.
Yep.
And tried to explain that the only thing that changed when the maps and the numbers were revised a few weeks ago was the things that were measured, not the plan or the rollout schedule. So previously, households were identified and counted from the point of what was defined as construction commencing, which is where detailed designs are begun and some degree of inspection occurs in the street. But the time from there to actually having the opportunity to connect was not only long, but was stretching out further. So we felt that metric was unhelpful. So then what we did was to say, well, let's start reporting on a weekly basis the households where work had begun in the street.
Yep.
So that we could be fairly confident that within a period of some months, that community would be able to have access to the internet. So obviously that set is much smaller than this set, so all of a sudden a lot of colours disappeared. But the fact is that the intent remains, firstly the intent remains, as Senator Fifield has said, let's get this network rolled out efficiently, cost effectively, quickly and affordably. That's the priority. If we do that well, I'm sure you and the constituencies, etc., will feel well served. But along the way, we're going to show you more accurately what we are achieving, where the work is done, where the customers are, and so you'll be able to judge us on the rate of our progress. But people who used to be in areas that were on the map and are no longer being identified haven't been excluded from our plans. It's just that we've changed the measure.
Okay. So going back, so the 10,400 residents, they come from suburbs in Malak, Marara, Moyle, Anola, Karama, Eaton, Ludmilla, Parat, the Narrows, Warner, Bayview, Fanny Bay, Parat, the Gardens and East Point. So they were all a part of the original rollout to receive that, and you said that they...
It's still part of our plan.
Can you tell me that they do not have to pay anything for it? Because there was a fee proposed of $5,000 for a connection to these homes or businesses.
We at NBN have not changed any of the policies or the rules that were in place prior to the election. There was, I do recall there was a reference to situations where if the network was a fibre to the node network that utilised an existing copper line to the home, and that business or residents wanted to have a direct fibre link to the home, they could order that and there was a price for that. That was part of the government's policy.
So that's the new government policy
Yes.
now? Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Senator Lundy, you have 11 minutes.
11 minutes. All right, quickly. Since last time NBN Co appeared at estimates, there have been some new appointments and some people leaving. So I have a few questions about that. I know Dr Swakowski spent a little bit of time in his opening statement and since about change in personnel at NBN Co. But for the recruitment of the COO and the new head of strategy and transformation, was a search or recruitment company engaged?
The COO?
Yeah.
No.
And for the new head of strategy and transformation?
No.
No? Why not?
It was clear to me, pardon me, when I got there, what I felt needed to be strengthened and also better organised, and where the resources should be located, particularly in the light of the fact that we had to revise the strategy and undertake really a forensic analysis of the activities of NBN Co. Mr. Rousselot was known to me. I regard him very highly, and he was a very, very good fit to that role. I offered him that role. He's been in that position for several weeks, and thus far it appears to be a very good appointment. With respect to the COO, again, in my judgment, the skill set that was missing, but which I think was essential, there were a couple of elements. One was a good and deep understanding of the Australian contracting and construction industry, because everybody, I think, now appreciates who has worked in other parts of the world. We do things a bit differently. We write contracts differently. We approach variations differently. We needed people who had experience in that area, and we also needed people who understood Telstra, its network, and the opportunities that may present themselves in leveraging some of their capabilities. And a change of leadership suggested itself to me, and I did target Mr. Adcock as the man to fill that role. And from NBN Co's point of view, I think that too has been a very good appointment.
Did you discuss with the Minister these appointments?
I kept him apprised of my thinking, yes.
And did he raise these appointments with you?
No.
I understand that Mr. Rousselot is a former associate of Mr. Turnbull. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I know they have some history.
Yeah. Do you know, apart
He's also a former associate of mine since he was at Telstra, when I was at Telstra.
Right, so that's your association.
That's my association with him.
And what is Mr. Turnbull's association with Mr. Rousselot? I understand that they have had other relationships.
You know, I can't provide an answer to that.
Minister, could you take that on notice?
Sure.
There are lots of rumours floating around, and this is the only opportunity we have to resolve it. But I'm particularly interested to know whether they've had any joint assets, Mr. Rousselot and Mr. Turnbull, and in particular whether one of those joint assets was a yacht. So you'll take that on notice?
Sure.
Thank you.
Look, I hope you're not
this is the only chance I have. I'm not making a big deal about it. I just need to place it on the record.
That's okay. No,
Minister.
I'm just wondering if you're making it a statement or
just
repeating things you've heard round the traps.
Indeed, but this is the only opportunity I have to place them on the record, and I will use the estimates process to do exactly that. What I won't do is make a song and dance about it, as members of your party did with respect to Mr. Quigley and some of the appointments that were made to NBN Co earlier on. But I do think this committee and the public deserve an answer about this.
I can hear music and dancing already.
Indeed. Dr. Swakowski, I note that when you were appointed, there was some commentary from shareholders in a number of the other companies that you're associated with were concerned about the time that you were able to spend to your other duties. I want you to outline to the committee how many hours a week you are spending on NBN Co, so you have the opportunity to reassure all those other shareholders that you're not neglecting other duties, please.
Senator Lundy, I have already reassured other shareholders, including at 2 AGMs, where frankly I raised the issue in my comments and it provoked no questions. But it's a fair question. I have said to the Minister at the point of appointment that I would spend between 3.5 and 4 days a week over a period of time until we found a new CEO, which was going to be one of my top priorities. It does mean that I carry a substantial load and I am working 7 days a week. Happily, I'm enjoying the mix of responsibilities. But NBN Co does need a committed full-time leader, and we are reasonably progressed along that particular path.
Thank you, Dr. Swakowski. I'd also like to ask a couple of questions about as chairman of NBN Co, you're obviously familiar with your obligations under the Corporations Act and the NBN Board Charter, including ensuring the efficient functioning and proper processes of the board. I note that under the Charter, the NBN Co has a nominations committee which provides shareholder ministers with recommendations on board membership. Is that correct?
I would assume it would have that. I can't recall having read it, but I assume so.
Well, I understand that you as chairman heads up that committee, and if so, can you confirm that Mr Hackett has recently been appointed to the board of NBN Co?
Sorry, Senator, what are you asking me to confirm?
That Mr Hackett has been appointed to the board of the NBN Co, yep. Did the nominations committee make this recommendation or the shareholder ministers?
No, well, firstly, the structure of the board at the point of those kind of decisions was that we were down to 3 board members, which was just sufficient to exercise our responsibilities. I led the way in identifying, I as chairman led the way in identifying potential board members. There was a reasonable list. To that end, we were advised, but I think, in fact, I know that the external advisors were commissioned by the department, and I provided input, indeed my recommendations as to board appointments from the perspective that it was the minister who was going to make the call.
Certainly, but are you aware, given that the NBN is a wholesale-only network, were you aware at the time of Mr Hackett's appointment of his role as a substantive, in fact the largest internet service provider? And are you concerned that that presents a conflict?
I was certainly aware of Mr Hackett's interests. I mean, the largest of our internet service providers is, of course, Telstra, then Optus, then iiNet, where Mr Hackett has equity and a position on the board. Frankly, it's that sort of history that made him valuable, in my view, to the board, since he is of the community of retail service providers and has made a point over the last few years of informing himself in great detail about the NBN. Is there potential for conflict? Yes, there is. And we have well-defined processes. The previous board ensured this because they had to deal with a conflict of interest amongst that board, that they had good processes in place to work around that. And we will continue to respect those processes, and I expect that we will have no difficulty in exercising our responsibilities. And Simon, too, I think is aware of that aspect.
Senator Lundy, this will have to be your last question because Senator Perez has one question to ask and we've got 2 minutes left.
Okay. Well, I'll be placing some questions on notice, including about Gungahlin and Belconnen and all of the other Canberra suburbs. Really. But the issue really is, wouldn't Mr Hackett have to excuse himself from most board deliberations if the decisions were associated were about the nature of the network, i.e. either giving the company of which he is still a part inside knowledge? And surely if he was that important, he could be consulted, as NBN Co consults widely with the industry.
Indeed. There were those options, and they were a consideration. I've been reminded that Mr Hackett has resigned from the board or will resign from the board of iiNet at the end of this month, so that reduces his direct involvement with the company.
I'm not challenging his expertise, I'm challenging the appropriateness of his presence on the board.
I must go to Senator Perez who has one last question, okay?
Okay, I'll be placing other questions on notice.
Senator Perez.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I forgot to ask the question before. It was relating to the 15 suburbs that were left without the NBN. You said that they were still available to them. And they had to pay a service fee for it. Are you able to confirm the amount of that fee? And will the government provide any sort of grants to assist them?
Look, if I understand the question, I assume that households in those suburbs were going to get fibre to the premises under the earlier plan, but that they have a copper network that's currently serving them, and if they do, then they will get perhaps fibre to the premises, but more likely fibre to the node, and the copper will remain to their home. Nothing else will change. There will be no cost changes. If some of those households say, no, we would like a direct fibre connection, then there is consideration being given to providing that at a fee. By and large, I think that is an unlikely alternative to be taken up, but it's there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Switkowski, and representatives from NBN. 3 hours of drilling, and you can have the rest of the night off. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
And I call now officers for the department in relation to program 1.1 Broadband and Communications Infrastructure. Who's got questions? You leading off, Anne? Or Louise? Or who? So we have on this session 30 minutes. 7.